let's draw a beautiful dotted line, and I'm sure you'll agree there's never been anything more impressive than that. And let's draw across this dotted line an arrow, and let me state that this dotted line represents legality. And what I want to sort of stress here is that with regard to performance enhancing drugs, we have certain substances, methods, procedures that are what we describe as legal supplements. And we have over here things that would be called illegal, I think I've missed an L there, illegal drugs and doping. Legal drugs and doping. Now you might be thinking, well, why a dotted line, why an arrow? The point I want to make here is that this line does shift from left to right in different circumstances at times. Some things that have previously been illegal become legal, and vice versa. That is published annually by WADA and the National Anti-Doping Agencies, of the NADAs. Okay, so we find that those sort of publications update and refine this model. But what I want to sort of stress to you at this point is the sort of things that might be included as a legal supplement. I think I've got a different colour by chance, but here we could be talking about something like creatine. Creatine monohydrate is a completely legal substance which is used a lot in, for example, professional football. We could be talking about, and of course the creatine is useful for sort of explosiveness. We have colostrum, which is really good for immunity, and is really a useful sort of power training drug. Colostrum, by the way, is the initial milk that a mammal releases for its young just shortly after birth. We also might have things like vitamin supplements. You may well be taking vitamin supplements yourself for all kinds of different reasons, and they are of course completely legal. And we could be talking about things like protein supplements. I'm confident that there'll be people who are taking this tutorial who might be going, for example, for a gym session or a weight session and then using protein as a recovery aid, right? Now on the illegal side, we are talking about different things. We are talking about things such as steroids. We are talking about things such as analgesics, which of course are, especially narcotic analgesics, they're sort of pain relievers. We are talking about things such as peptide hormones, such as EPO, for example. These are completely illegal and banned sport. But the intuition I want you to kind of develop here is that sometimes we get movement this way, sometimes we get movement this way. And also what tends to happen is we also get movement here, because these drugs become kind of more expansive, more modern, more scientific, and legal supplements can do likewise. Now, if something sort of as a legal supplement becomes particularly effective, it may well find itself transitioning onto that illegal side. Now, what I want to do is start focusing on the illegal stuff, okay? So let's acknowledge that people use supplements and things like that in a legal sense. What would be the reasons for illegal doping? Reasons for illegal doping. Notice the word illegal, folks. Illegal doping. Why would an athlete shove a bunch of steroids in their body, say? Well, the biggest answer, and I cannot stress this enough, is up arrow, an increased chance of winning. It is by far the most relevant and important reason an athlete would take performance enhancing drugs. Reflect on that. It is clearly the central reason. And because of that, we can describe this as a win at all costs ethic. Or mentality. I'm going to put attitude actually. Now, can I stress to you, this is not what we'd call a win ethic. A win ethic is actually something different. Win ethic tends to lean towards professionalism, uncovering every stone, marginal gains. Win at all costs ethic is a deviant way of thinking in order to get the better of opponents, in order to win no matter what the costs. That's a different mentality. But that's what we tend to find with athletes who have moved towards doping. We can also say that fame and fortune can, of course, be the big drivers. Athletes, if they win Olympic medals or lucrative contracts, sponsorship deals, of course, they come with money. It could also be to do with pressure. I mean, this example really makes me reflect on Dwayne Chambers, who was introduced to THG by a coach, a coach who sort of appeared miraculously at a training ground one day. They could be pressured, but it could be pressure from us. It could be pressure from other athletes. That particular example makes me think of Lance Armstrong, of course, who's been accused of pressuring fellow cyclists in his teams to take, amongst other things, EPO. Now, we also want to sort of stress that some athletes do it because everyone does it. And again, the cycling example, especially in the 90s, is a really good example. We could describe this as the culture of the sport. It's very difficult to gain a professional contract in some examples because of this. We without taking the drugs, I should say. We could say level the playing field. Lots of athletes who have taken performance-enhancing drugs use this phrasing, I had no choice, I had to do what I had to do. And then finally, folks, I'm going to describe what we might loosely refer to as positive psychological effects. And one of these is almost like the placebo effect, right? Where you train harder, you push yourself. It's like the final commitment that you have to make that jump and that next level. They are amongst the reasons why athletes will take performance enhancing drugs. Now, where I want to go with this is start to think about the consequences. Now, if you happen to have done tutorials with me on things like violence, for example, you'll know we look at consequences in a lot. It depends what course you're on, but consequence for society is where I want to start this conversation. If we have athletes take performance enhancing drugs, why is that bad? Well, first of all, it will produce what's called a national scandal. I mean, there's lots of examples of this. I think about Ben Johnson in 1988, sort of national scandal for Canada. I think of Marion Jones, national scandal for the US. I mean, although Mo Farah was never found guilty of taking any drugs, his coach, Alberto Salazar, was of administering drugs, and that became a real scandal in the UK as well. We also have the development of negative role models. As I say that, can I please just stress that Mo Farah, as I recall this, has never been found guilty of any drug taking. I think it's been alleged, but he's certainly never been found guilty of that. So we get negative role models. We've looked at that a lot across these courses. The sport loses respect. You know, people may just say, look, I'm not watching that, I'm not getting involved in that anymore, because what's the point? It's not real. We might also have fewer people, or well, put it this way, people have fewer distractions. You know, if you're an avid sports fan and your sport becomes sort of filthy with drugs, then of course the distraction you have, that sort of escapism, is much less possible. People invest less in sport. Okay, so people invest less. So that the tax income in that sport, the purchasing of road bicycles, for example, might go down, and the tax implication of that might mean there's less tax going into the coffers, for example. We might also get fewer participants. And remember, this is a societal level glance we're having here. Fewer participants means a less healthy nation, right? Or potentially at least. And that, of course, could have its own cost and societal implications for everybody. We also have, possibly, this is an interesting one, a loss of patriotism. You know, if your a favourite national athlete, for example, tests positive for steroids, it's all of a sudden that sort of patriotic glow that you had previously might sort of drift away, or in fact be burst there and then on the spot. We also want to have a look at consequences, not just of society, but we want to look at consequences for the sport. If the sport becomes linked to drug taking, what sort of implication does that have? Well, absolutely clearly, of course, we have the loss of sponsors. I mean, that's an absolute classic and something that, athletes really need to be considering. We'd also get the loss of participants, people not wanting to be linked to that particular sport, and whether that's at grassroots or at elite level, people refusing to take those drugs and not being able to be part of it. We'd also have the loss of supporters. If you lose the respect of the people that effectively pay into your coffers, that's a big problem, because they will not back you. We also get negative public image. So we put negative public image. It goes without saying, cycling is the example I always want to go to here, becomes linked with drug taking. Even things in the future can't be believed. You also get negative media coverage, and rightly so, right? I mean, let's be in reality. They're not feeling sorry for anyone here. It's right that negative media coverage would come with this sort of experience. We'd also get increased pressure to ID cheats, and this comes at a cost, right? So if your sport becomes linked, let's say athletics, with steroid abuse, for example, athletics has to invest a huge amount in actually dealing with that problem. That can be very, very costly. And that we would describe as investment into anti-doping. Now, I'm not saying it's negative to invest into anti-doping. What I'm saying there is it has a cost, right? They absolutely should be investing into anti-doping, but what is the cost of that, and what was that money being used for previously, and does that have an implication? And to finish this off, folks, I'll go as quickly as I can for you. We want to have a look at consequences for performers. So if a performer decides to stick a needle in their arm and take steroids, or take part in blood doping, what does it mean for them? Okay, what are the potential outcomes for them? Now, we've always said that, it could be that they have a better chance of winning, but we're going to look at the negative side here. Loss of personal sponsors. Lance Armstrong is by far the best example of this. He claimed that when he outed himself, although he had been broadly outed before, he claimed it was a $70 million loss on an individual day from sponsorship deals. These people will be banned. I'll go back to Armstrong as my example. He was banned from athletic and cycling events for life. We can also say they experience a loss of respect. Absolutely. Again, I'm going to mention Armstrong here again. He's on a bit of a comeback trail, running his podcast and this kind of stuff. But basically, people don't like him. He has to fight against that. They're considered a cheat. Imagine going your whole life and every time, especially if you're famous, every time somebody turns around and sees you, the first thing they think about you is you're a cheat, you're dirty, you're shameful. And that's the other one. It might lead to shame. Now, this gets quite serious, right? You can imagine people having all kinds of mental health problems off the back of this, not least because it would have an effect on family members. We looked at this. If you've done this, if you've done the stuff on violence with me, depending on the course you're on, you may well have touched on this with me before, but of course family members are going to be affected. Not least that the family members probably didn't know this person was dope and had been lied to again and again and again. That's going to be difficult for people to resolve. We also get press intrusion. That's going to be really difficult for people, of course, not being able to live their lives, not being able to feel that sort of freedom. And finally, although we might all feel it's pretty deserved, these people might experience online abuse. And of course, some of the things I've written down here, if you put them together as a package, these can really lead to negative mental consequences for an individual, which, despite what people have done, nobody really wants, right? So these are both the legal and illegal line that we might want to be, the differences between. We've looked at the reasons for performers taking drugs and the consequences to 3 different groups. Thank you.